Today we're going to be installing a heater in this 2017 Ranger 900 XP. It is the Polaris OEM heater, and it goes in the dash. It is hidden behind the dash. The only thing that's exposed are the vents. And so here I'm going to pull everything out of the box and see what we got in there. This kit fits the Ranger 900 XP from 2013 to present, which would be 2018 models, as well as the Ranger 570 XP. This is the Polaris OEM heater kit. The part number is 2880023. In the box we have the instructions, set of zip ties, probably going to need a few more than that, the ducting hose, the vents, kind of some vent insulators, a cap for going over a hole that is created, a plenum which distributes the air, heater hoses, clamps and fittings, the control panel, and then the heater core itself. This installation is fairly basic. It does take some time, so bear with me as we go through this. It will take probably a couple, 3 hours for someone who's never done it before. A couple things you might want to have that do not come with the kit are the electrical wires, which are ran from the battery up to the electrical bus, and I will show you what that looks like here in the next clip or two. Also, there is a bushing that can go in the firewall for some wire management. Comes with some accessories but does not come with this, so I will show you that as well. We are going to get started by taking off the windshield and the hood, and I will show you the next step after I get those accessories off. Here's what it looks like without the hood on. This is the grommet I was talking about, part number 5414440. It's a rubber grommet that gets put in the place of that plastic hole. We will need to cut this out with a razor blade, and then, I mean, you certainly can just leave the hole there and have your wire running through there, but it's going to be a place where air can get through the firewall. So these grommets are nice. I think they're like $5 or $6 if you don't have one. Another thing that's really handy to have for these installations is this adhesive foam and a set of battery cables, which I will show how to install later. Now we get to the disassembly of the dash, basically the first step of installing the heater. There's a few different pieces we need to take off. The first one being this dash cap. This is held in with rivets. There's 4 of them. Once those 4 are removed, this piece will slide rearward and up, and then you can pull it out of there. And then you have the front of the dash, which is some T40s all along the bottom. I think there's probably about 8 of them or so, all the way across the machine. And then you're going to have some of those plastic rivets. There are a couple hidden right now, but they will be exposed once you get the top cap off. The shift lever knob needs to be removed, so you need to pry the cap off. And then there's a T25 headed Torx bolt that needs to be removed to slide the shifter apart. You will have the electrical connections behind your switches, your ignition, your speedometer. Those all need to come off. And then this drive shaft cover down here that has some rivets, 2 right there, and then 1 on each side in the front. With those removed, you can pull the cover off, and I will do all of that now and show you what it looks like when it's done. I should say you also have some screws on the glove box. I think there's 4 around the rim of that, and then 1 tucked way in the back. There will still be 1 more piece left on the lower part, which I guess I can just show you right now. Once you get the dash off, that's kind of just sitting there hanging loose. You only have 4 screws, 2 on this side and then 2 on the opposite side, and then the bottom dash will pop out as well. Here's a tool that's available to buy, auto parts stores, online. Would be the 2 probably easiest places to find them. This is the tool that is used to remove these plastic rivets. The way that it works is it just slides under the head, you pop it up, pull the center out of, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch or so, and then you're able to get underneath the base pop that up as well. So this little dart is what you're left with. These are reusable. We need to reuse them for the reinstallation. And you're going to use this tool quite a bit. You don't have to use this tool. You can use a screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, side cutter, something like that. Certainly, if you're going to be doing 20, 30 of these, you can buy one of these for under $10. Makes your life a whole lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these rivets pulled and show you what it looks like after it's done. Here's what it looks like without the cap and the cover. I'm going to continue pulling off the rivets and the T40s. You can see there's some rivets there that are going to need to be pulled. This whole center section is actually only held in with 2 screws. One right there, one right there. So once the electrical's unplugged, you can pull that middle part out as well. I got the dash so that all of the hardware is out, all of the electrical is unhooked, the shifter knob is off, it's pretty loose. We have to pull it out. Watch out for the lever there, the steering lever. I've never broken one off, but it looks like it could be done. We need to, I think it's easier if we lower the wheel here. Basically shimmy this just up and out. Sometimes if you got an extra person to give you a hand, it works best. The hardest part is just getting the shift lever to go through that grommet. Pull that out of there, and then all we should be left with is the bottom portion of the dash. Dash came out easy. Now we just have those 4 screws at the very bottom and the 1 T40 headed bolt tucked back in there, and then that whole bottom plastic will pull right out. Here we have the dash completely taken apart and ready to install the heater core. First I'm going to run the battery cables. So this is just under the battery, or under the passenger seat. There's kind of a storage tub that pulls out of here. You have your battery down there, obviously. We take a set of 6-gauge battery cables, run them from the positive and negative battery through the hole down there, along your coolant pipes, up through in front of the firewall. Then they come down. Basically, you can just zip them anywhere you want. Zip time, I usually just follow the brake line or that vent line all the way up. Go up by the radiator there. They will pop out either right here or through that hole. And then we will hook up one of the battery cables to here, one of them to here. Usually I go positive on the left, ground in the middle. And then we have your key on ignition wire. This should be already hooked up on every vehicle. For instance, the heater has 3 wires. One of the wires goes to the positive battery on, one of them goes to the regular battery negative, and the regular battery positive. The key on wire only has power when the key is on, so the way that it is wired, even if you have the heater vent turned on, it will not have power unless the key is on, similar to automotive. So even though you have direct power to the battery, you will not have power unless the key is on. Once we have power there, we're then going to be able to power the heater by running through the firewall and just going right to there. Certainly you wouldn't need to run 6-gauge cables. We do, because if you ever put a winch on in the future or something that's going to draw a lot of power, then you have enough power or enough flow to do so. We make our own cables here. This is 6-gauge welding cable. Certainly you can do it this way. It's probably easier for most people just to buy the wire kit from Polaris. I think it's $30. I don't know what the part number is off the top of my head, but your local Polaris dealer should know what kit you need and how to find it. I certainly can find the part number. If that's something that you want, just throw it in the comments section and I'll figure it out. After the battery cables are mounted, then we can continue on with the heater install. There's some dimples in the plastic. One right there. It's kind of hard to see because it's dirty. There's a dimple there, dimple there, dimple there. That's where the heater actually mounts to the plastic. There's metal rails behind it. You probably only need to make a 1/4 inch hole. I usually go 5/16 because the holes are never perfectly lined up. Drill out those holes. Don't go too deep. There is wiring harnesses behind those, so be very careful when you're drilling those not to snag one of the wiring harnesses. And then the heater bolts to that with your 4 bolts right here. Take the nuts off. There's kind of some rubber grommets for some suspension, or so it's not super hard mount. It's got a little bit of flex. I always mount the heater hoses first. So just there's 2 of them there. Hook them up to these nipples. It's just a lot easier to put the heater hose on before you mount the heater than after. So go ahead and get the hoses hooked up to the heater and the heater mounted into place. The nuts go through the back side. They are pretty hard to reach. Once the heater is poked through, you'll have access to the studs on the back side to mount the nuts. Here we got the battery cables hooked up to the bus. I'm going to wait to do this until later, but this will get zip tied out of the way. Runs down through there, over the coolant lines, and then up through here. The negative can just go down on that negative block down there. You can see there's all those wires hooked up there. That's just kind of the frame ground. You can certainly go to that. Could go right to the battery. Same with the positive, could go right to the battery. I usually just go to the solenoid here because it's easier, but you can hook that up. I'm going to wait to hook these up until the very end. Same with zip tying. There's no point in zip tying now because there's a bunch of stuff we got to zip tie at the end. Might as well do it all at the same time. I'm going to drill those holes out 5/16, get the heater mounted. Also, I'm not sure if they say this in the instructions or not. I have found you need to carve this out a little bit, kind of where you can see my dust print there. We actually need to take that material out of there. We have those 2 big heater hoses which are mounted to the heater up here. They're going to come down, go through this cover, and then go back to the engine. But if we cut this out, I would say 2 inch wide by 1 inch deep, it makes it a lot easier, less likely for the hoses to get damaged. You will see that cut out once I get the heater mounted. Usually I just use a side cutters and a flat side cutters and regular side cutters to just chop that out of there, and then take some emery cloth or some sandpaper and just rough the edges up so they're not sharp. There I got the cutout taken out of the plastic, and then I sanded it down so it wasn't sharp. Got the holes drilled and have the hoses mounted. I'm going to throw this heater into place, bolt it in, and then just route the hoses kind of back by the battery for now, and then we'll hop on to the next step. Here we got the heater core itself mounted. You can see the hoses run down right there. They'll kind of fall into place there. Run along the coolant tubes back here just for now. It'll eventually go under the muffler there and then back to the engine. And then for mounting this thing, there's the 4 studs and nuts that poke through the firewall. Just screw it down. I'm not even sure what it says in the instructions to do next, but I'm going to show you how to cut out all the plastics, which is probably the most intimidating portion of this whole job, because it's this, it's the portion you're going to see at the final product. I've done about 50 of these heaters, so I think I got it kind of nailed down to a science, but I'll show you where they need to be cut, how I cut it. Certainly not necessarily the best way, but it's what I found to be the best way. And then we'll get all the plastics ready and start going back together with the dash. Here we're to the point where we're cutting the plastics. If you get set up properly for this, it's not too bad. First thing you're going to need, or at least the way I do it, is a utility knife. Put a brand new blade in there. Honestly, the old school screw together ones are the best for this. Out the fronts aren't terrible. Don't even bother with them folders. They're junk. I've had one break and stab myself in the leg before, and they're just not heavy duty at all. This is the best way to go because the blade will not go anywhere no matter how much force you put on it. Worst thing that's going to happen is the blade's going to break. Might want some heat. I just got some MAP gas here. Basically what I do with that, if I feel it necessary, if the plastic's just giving me grief, I just heat up the tip of the blade. It cuts a lot easier. Here we have the dash cap, the top piece. The 2 holes that are going to need to be cut out of this are these vents. This one right here, got another one right there. You can see how they're already engraved. What you need to cut out is right at the edge of this lip. Do not go to the outer lip. You'll cut the hole way too big. The inner lip, you basically are just cutting out this rectangle. Do that on both sides. You know, a lot of people have said, why don't you use a Dremel on this? It'd be much faster. You're right, it would be much faster, but the finished product, it looks like garbage. Here you have a nice clean cut, and if you got a brand new blade, especially a heated blade, it'll slice right through that plastic, and it'll look perfect when you're done. Cut out those two portions. The next piece would be this one. So there's going to be a vent that sits there, a vent that sits there, and then your control panel is actually going to sit right there. I cut out this whole that whole piece right there. The plastic there, same story. You got the line you got to cut out, rectangle there, cut out this rectangle there, and then this big rectangle. This is designed to be able to put extra switches in. If you don't have a heater in, you can put extra switches down there, but we need to cut out this whole piece to get that new control panel to fit in. I'll cut all those out and show you what it looks like when it's done. Here's what they look like when they're cut out. Both of these together took about 5, maybe 6 minutes. Good sharp blade definitely helps. Didn't need the gas this time. Sometimes the plastic's a little harder than others. You can see you got nice, smooth, clean lines. Cut out from the back. There and there. Go ahead and test fit all your vents. It should just kind of pop into place. Sorry. So here I can see it's not real wiggly. I mean, it'll move slightly, but not a whole lot. Pops through the bottom nicely. If you do cut the hole too big, there's a couple things you can do. As long as it's not astronomically large, you can wrap electrical tape around the outside of the vent, basically just to give it a little more girth, a little more holding power. That typically, 1 or 2 rounds is enough to make up for a good amount of slack. I mean, if you just went crazy with the hole, you could glue them into place. There is a flange on the vent, so it's going to cover some minor imperfections, but for some reason you accidentally cut on the outside line, it's just going to be so massively large, you're probably just going to want to look into getting a new top panel. I don't think they're that crazy expensive. Test fit all the vents, make sure they're all pretty decent. You can put them in now. I usually wait till the very end because then everything's in place where it's supposed to be. Again, these two side ones are going to be vents, and then this bottom one here is the control panel. That kind of pops down into place as well. I'll probably pop everything in just so you can see what it looks like, and then I'm going to grab the other pieces of plastic that we need to modify. Quick look at these. I got both the vents installed and the control panel. Same with on here. Everything fit pretty nicely. A lot of times at the very end I will actually put a couple dabs of glue on these 4 corners just to help these top ones, because for whatever reason these seem to want to pop out. So put a little glue on the underside and that'll help hold them in place. The next piece that needs to be cut out is the dash itself. So here's the speedometer for reference. The steering wheel will be right about here. So this is the driver's vent on the far left side when you're sitting in the vehicle. And then here would be the passenger's vent on the far right side when you're sitting in the vehicle. Just like on that dash cap, we need to cut on the inside line. So right where you feel the raised portion of the inside square, we need to cut all the way around that on both sides. Once you get the holes cut out, you can take the square vents, pop them into place. And these also fit pretty decent, maybe just a hair loose. Might put a dab of glue on the back side of these as well. The last piece we need to modify is the bottom. This actually needs to have this entire box cut off. So what I'm going to do, and this is one part I will use the Dremel. I'm going to take the Dremel tool and right behind this line here, go back about 1/4 inch. I'm actually going to cut this entire box off. And the way I do that is I actually take a Dremel with a disc on it and I go inside the front here, and then I'm able to go all the way around from the inside and cut it out. Otherwise there's no way you have access to the bottom to cut the bottom ledge without doing something to this. The reason we need to get rid of this box is the bottom vents, the vents that heat your feet, come through this plate, and basically the ducting and vents need to go from this plate up to the heater, and this box is directly in the way of that. So we need to remove the box and then grab the correct hole saw and cut 2 holes into that bottom plate.
On tonight.
A 3-inch hole saw. So I didn't do a lot of speaking back there, but as you can see from the video, we cut this box off completely with the Dremel, and then took a 3-inch hole saw, and there is no specific spot, just get them kind of centered, not too close to the edge. This is going to be for these vents right here. They pop in from the bottom, and this is what you see from inside the cab. So again, we had a storage box there, and no longer do. Plate that I talked about earlier, once we get everything put back together, we'll cover that hole and make it look like a finished product when we're done. Last piece we need to modify is the cooling system drive shaft cover. I think the instructions say to use a hole saw. I've honestly never got that to work that well for me, so I just take a set of side cutters and then one of these, I don't even know what the name is for this thing, and I cut back probably about 1.5 inches and then cut over and then come basically make a rectangular trapezoid. This is the space the cooling hoses need to go through. Again, once I get it cut, I sand everything down so there's no sharp edges. If it looks a little jankety, that's not that big of a deal. You never really can see this once it's all put back together. And then we will use some of that adhesive foam to really seal that up when we put it back together as well. So I'll get that cut out, sand it out, and show you what it looks like. There we go. Looks a little crude, I know, but it works great. Like I said, you can't see it when we're all said and done, and it gets the job done. I'm actually going to start putting the bottom back together. So we're going to use obviously the hardware we took out earlier to install the bottom piece. At least the 4 bottom bolts. I'm probably going to wait for the glove box bolt. Then we'll be able to put the plenum in there, get the ducts hooked up, and eventually get the dash and the top cap put back on, and then at that point we can finish routing the hoses to the engine, fill the machine with coolant, bleed the system, and finish this out. Here I got the lower portion put back in loosely. I just have the 2 on the right and the 2 on the left, about a full turn from being completely tight. The box is not screwed in yet. I'm going to take the plenum, which is this piece right here, and work that into position down there. It just sits over those 2 holes right there. Make sure I get that wire out of there. Make sure all your wiring and everything is out of there. And then before that goes on there completely, these foam pieces, which just help with air leakage, take the batting off the back of that and actually slide these down over the rim, and then when we put the plenum on, it is going to compress this and prevent for air leakage. So I'm going to get these put into place and then that plenum worked into place before I put the front cap back on. You can see I have the foam in place. The wiring is routed. The wiring that comes off the heater and is going to go up to that bus, it's the longest of all the wires. Route between the two and come up the back. That is going to go through that hole we cut in the firewall there. The other routing would be these wires you had to take off to take out those 12 volt plugs on the dash. Route those to the right of the plenum. And then your lights are going to come through the middle. And then the other two plugins you should have would be this plug-in. That's going to go right about here in that dash centerpiece, as well as this plug-in right here. So those can stay right where they're at. There should be some ductwork. I'm going to connect those now. So there's the two bigger ducts would go for those two vents up to those two parts of the plenum, and then held in place with zip ties. Once all the wiring is ran and the ducts are put on, we can go ahead and loosely put on the front part of the dash. There are two more foam pieces, two that are going to go on those top two rectangles, and then two that are going to go for those as well. Here you can see I ran the ducts from the vents up to the plenum. I also put on the foam pieces on the top, and then the foam pieces for the front, I end up just putting those right on the cover. So they'll get compressed when this gets put back in. You can see right on the side of the vent there. I also ran the wiring through. I cut out that plug, put in the grommet, ran the wiring through it, and then hooked that up. Red wire goes to battery positive, black wire goes to battery negative, yellow wire goes to key on ignition. So that's actually live, other than we don't have those wires hooked up to the battery yet. I also put on the side ducts because they're just easier to get at now than they are later. I'm going to put the face or the dash on, and there is nothing holding this in, just pressure. So it's sitting over the heater right now, and then when we put the front and the top cap on, it's basically getting pushed at from every angle, and that holds it in place. And it needs to be able to move a little bit for when we put that top cap on. You know, this side might need to go down a hair, that side might need to go down a hair, so there's a little bit of give there. Here I've got the dash installed. I have all of the hardware in, but not all of it is tightened. Make sure this gets put into place before you start screwing everything down. That's actually fairly easy to forget. And shifter went through, put that back on. I'm going to tighten all of the hardware now, both at the top, middle, and bottom. And then I'm going to leave this top cap off until the very end. This can get put back on. You got all the electrical connections, so you're going to have to kind of hold it up there, plug in all the electrical, and then that'll slide into place, and it just held in with them two screws at the bottom. This connection in particular is really tight. They just didn't make this long enough, to be honest, so it's very hard to get at, but it is possible. Get that front middle cap put on, get all the hardware tightened, basically leave everything except for the top cap. And then we're going to start working on cutting the heater hoses and hooking them up to the engine. A couple more things before I put it back together. Obviously hook up the ducts to those vents. Use the zip ties. This piece just slides in here. Just kind of some tabs. There we go. Textured side out. Or towards the operator, I should say. And then here's a place I like to use this foam. Those vents pads I put on there, I'm not sure if they're actually meant to go there, if they're meant to go between this plastic and the plenum. I like to do both, so I will take some of this foam and actually wrap it around the plenum on the back side of this plastic to help take up some of those air gaps. And then at that point we can put that cover on. Here's the part where we actually start hooking up the hoses so the coolant can run from the engine through the heater. Obviously we have the hoses coming off of the heater, running down there along the coolant lines. They need to go under the box in the middle. Ran approximately like that. You know, you want to avoid sharp edges such as those clamps, anything moving. There really shouldn't be anything moving in that particular area. Go under the muffler and then up approximately in that area right there. One note, if you take the pin out, take that shock off, the whole box tips back quite a bit further, makes it a lot easier to work in this area. The two places we need to put the hoses are, that fitting down there needs to come off. One of the hoses gets cut to length and goes on that fitting. Then we will actually remove about 8 inches of that hose, cut it right kind of where that number is, and there is a splice that gets put in. The splice goes in this short hose right here, coming off that oil cooler. We're going to have probably about 6 inches of hose there. And then on the other end of the splice is where you're going to put your other cut hose. So these hoses will need to be cut to length. What I use is just a hose cutter. Utility knife works just fine if that's all you have. You're going to need zip ties, fittings and clamps that they gave us, a little silicone spray to put on the nipple if the hoses are going on hard. That doesn't hurt anything. And then a nut driver for tightening the hose clamps. So right now what I'm going to want to do is just kind of put the hoses in position of about where they're going to need to be and cut them. You know, aim high, you know, go long. If anything, you can always shorten it. If it ends up where there's just way too much slack, you can always shorten it. It's pretty hard to lengthen it. So get it close, but we are going to need to pull that fitting off. There's a little metal clasp, and pull the hose off. And coolant's going to be gushing out at you the second that comes off. So make sure everything's ready to go. As soon as you pull that fitting off, you're going to want to slide the new hose on with the clamp already on it. And if you leave the top hose undone, you will get some drips of coolant, but it's not going to come gushing out like it will out of that nipple. So here I'm going to cut both hoses. I'm going to start by pulling that clamp off and then get one of the hoses hooked up to that position. Here I have removed the hose that was on that nipple from the engine and hooked up one of my two hoses. I'm sure some of you are asking which hose goes where. It does not say in the instructions. I've contacted Polaris. They didn't really give me any help either. I know I have hooked them up one of both ways several times. You know, it's probably a 50-50 shot. I have not seen any difference in the amount of heat that comes out of the heater. So there probably is an ideal way, you know, which hose goes to which nipple. I really haven't found that it matters, but just letting you know. Now I'm going to cut that hose right where that number is, just cut probably right in the middle of that number. Put the splice in one end, tighten it down, take my other hose here, shorten it slightly if I need to, put that on the other end of the splice, tighten that down, and then this remainder piece of hose that we'll have left, kind of this fitted hose, you can just throw that away. I'll get that done and show you what it looks like. Here we have everything hooked up. You can see the hoses going down there, hooked up to both fittings. Pretty important step at this point would be to zip tie everything out of the way. And what I mean by that is make sure these clamps aren't going to be rubbing against anything. You can certainly clip off the tails. I actually normally take that adhesive foam, wrap it around the clamps and zip tie them together just so that there's no exposed sharp edges. There's a motor mount down here. Not a bad place to zip tie the lines to. Obviously keep it as far away from the muffler as possible. I mean, I've seen machines where they only had a ½ inch and it didn't really seem to affect anything. Because you have fluid flowing through those lines, I don't think the heat really bothers them too much. But obviously you don't want it touching. Just get everything as zip tied out of the way as possible. Run the lines down kind of by the battery. And then if you do have some excess slack, just pull the slack into the battery compartment and just tie it off. And then as you go, zip tie everything out of the way. Just make sure they're not touching anything sharp. Make sure they're not touching the prop shaft, which would be pretty hard on this machine because it's already covered. And at this point you could probably zip tie the whole line unless you're putting on more accessories. Just get everything so it's zip tied nice and tight. Here I elected to put some of that adhesive foam around the clamps, zip tied that out of the way, zip tied them to the motor mount frame. You can see it goes under the shield there, comes around, zip tied out of the way, loops under that cover, and then I zip tied it to the electrical harness. I don't know, you have that cover that's going to be going on at the end that we cut the hole out. I elected to put some foam around those hoses too. What that's going to do is seal off any small gaps that might be there, as well as protect the hoses over time from rubbing up against the plastic. And you'll see what it looks like when it's put together. This is the most important step in the whole process. Doesn't say anything about it in the instructions, and I'm sure a lot of people have not done anything about this, not realizing they needed to bleed / add coolant to the system. First step would be to take the radiator cap off. Don't even worry about the tank right now. Don't even worry about that till the end. Just make sure there's enough coolant in there that it can operate. A little low right now, but there's obviously a huge air pocket in the system. I'm assuming most people don't have easy access to a coolant bleeding system, you know, like an automotive shop would have. So I'm just going to show you how to do it the old school way. This is the way most people are going to be able to do it at home. Take the cap off the radiator. On the engine itself, right above the exhaust there, you can see a bolt in the head, between the shield and the head, right there. That is the bleeder screw. When we crack that open, that allows air / coolant to flow up through the engine when the radiator cap is off. Now it's not, when you crack it open, you're going to hear a hiss of air. Wait until the hiss stops or coolant starts coming out. Close the breather, go back up to your coolant tank, radiator, top off the radiator, come back, do that again. Now we're not going to get the whole works in one shot. This oftentimes requires 3 to 4 runs. So once we've gotten it to the point where coolant is coming out of the head, bleed screw, and the radiator's full, we tighten the screw, put the radiator cap back on, fire the machine up. Now this is going to allow the machine to heat up and cycle the coolant. Now there's a few places there's going to be air pockets. The heater, for one. That's not going to get filled with coolant until coolant starts flowing through the system. Also in the hoses, if there's any high spots, there's going to be air pockets there. What I do, and I find the best way to do it if you don't have a bleeding system, would be to start the machine and let it get warm. Now the first time you run it, it's probably going to get warm pretty quickly because there's going to be quite a bit of air in the system, so you need to watch it the first time. The speedometer will show you the coolant temperature, and typically when it gets to 206 degrees Fahrenheit, the fan will kick on. Now it'll probably get there pretty quickly. So I mean, if you get to 200 degrees, I would just shut the key off. Let the machine cool down, which is the biggest issue, that it takes time. Let the engine cool down. For one, you're not going to be able to get at that screw without burning your hand because it's right next to the exhaust. And two, you want the cooling system to regulate. So once it cools down, you pop the radiator cap off again, go unscrew the screw. It'll hiss at you, air coming out of there. Do it back and forth until coolant starts coming out of the screw exclusively. Sometimes you'll get a little spatter of coolant, but you'll still have air. Let it hiss until the point where just coolant is coming out. Top the radiator off, put the cap back on, run it again. And repeat that process until you're not getting any more air coming out of that bleeder screw. At that point, once you've had the system not take any more coolant, top this tank off. There's a max cold line. I'd probably go maybe even an inch higher than that, because even with this style bleeding system, you're not going to get it all. This machine is designed to self-regulate as you drive. So if there is air in the system, it's supposed to take it from the bottle and fill the radiator as you drive. With the heating and cooling of this cooling system is how it works. That works if there's a little bit of air in the system. It does not work if there's a lot of air in the system. So if we were to just put the radiator cap on right now and just drive it, there's going to be huge air pockets in the machine. You're going to damage the motor at some point. So we at least need to do 2 or 3 runs where we are pulling air out of the system, and that is done by filling the radiator, and unscrewing the bleeder on the head. Approximately, 3, maybe 4 times, and you'll have 95% of the air out of the system. At that point, we can rely on the bottle to take care of it over time. And it's not unlikely that, a month after driving it with the heater installed, you'll need to refill that bottle and just top it off to the cold line. Here's an example of the process. So I have the radiator coolant completely full. Go back here. If you take this shield off, it's much easier to do this. I'm just stubborn. Yeah, I'll get my wrench on the next clip here. It's an 8mm socket. And we take it and loosen it up here. That just hissed for about a second and then stopped. I guess that doesn't surprise me for the first time. A lot of times you need to heat it up first before you get the big air pocket in the head. Let me heat it up a little bit and then see if we can get a better shot next time. Running the machine for, I don't know, about a minute and a half. Muffler's still cooling down, but the top is pretty cool yet. I just wanted to see if I could show this to you. When you loosen that screw, there we go. You can hear it hissing there. Always let the machine cool down before you do that. Do not take the radiator off, do not take the radiator cap off when the machine is warm, otherwise it'll spurt at you. Again, basically the process is get out the air, have the radiator cap off, top off the radiator cap, close the bleed screw, go outside and run it until it gets warm, come back in, do the same thing, do that about 3 times, you should have most of the air out of the system. So now that I got the screw bled, there's still no coolant coming out, so that means that I must need to fill the radiator. I'll go do that quick. I still have 2 more bleeding steps to do, but it ended up taking about a half a quart of coolant at least, so it took quite a bit. Yeah, do that whole setup 3 times. Close the system, heat it up, cool it down, open the radiator, open the bleed screw until it stops hissing, close the bleed screw, top off the radiator, do the bleed screw one more time if you think it'll still take more coolant, top off the radiator again, close the radiator, fire it up, bring it outside, let it run for a few minutes, and do that whole process a couple times. You do, once you get to the third time doing it, you do want to let the machine get good and hot. And what I mean by that is get it up to that 206 degrees. It'll cool itself down once the fan comes on to 185, 190 or so, and then it'll climb back up to 206, and it'll keep doing that. I would probably let the fan cycle 3 times, and then shut it down, cool it off, and do the final bleed. And then at that point, top off the coolant, the white coolant bottle. I usually put a little bit more in than the max just because it will take a little bit more as you use the machine. As far as the installation, it's pretty much done. Hook the box back up, put the pin back through the shock and the cable, if you have a cable on there. Hook up your battery stuff. I still have some more stuff to put on this, so I'm going to just leave it here for now. But hook up your battery cables for the heater. Make sure that all works. Check all of the electronics. These are pretty easy to forget. Make sure you plugged those wires in. Make sure you plugged in all your wires there. Your key switch, obviously, you're going to know if that's not working. Make sure your speedometer works. That cover right there, remember I have that right here. I cut the hole out of it. When that's into position, look something like that. That foam really kind of takes up the gaps, and then you just put the darts back in to finish that cover. Same with the top cap. That just slides into position and is held on with those 4 darts. If your vents are giving you trouble, if your vents are popping out of the cap, I would just glue them in. These are kind of rigid and they put a lot of pressure around that vent, so If your cut wasn't perfect and the vents are a little sloppy, you probably are going to have to glue those in. And then just zip tie everything out of the way, zip tie the wires clean, seal up the system, and you're good to go. Should be getting heat pretty quickly. You know, if the you have 3 settings. You have off, low, medium, high for the fan, and you have just outdoor, you know, regular. It's not cold air. I mean, this does not have air conditioning, but you'll just get regular vent, and then max heat. What's nice about this system is you can turn it down, and honestly, this thing will heat you out of here if you got a cab. I mean, this heater puts out crazy amount of heat, so you can back it off if you need. You obviously got your 2 vents here, your 2 on the sides, and then your 2 feet vents. Those are those bottom ducts we put in. Those you can slide around and aim wherever you want. That's pretty much it. You know, certainly comment if you got any questions. There's certainly a step I could have missed. I put so many of these in, I sometimes forget to talk about certain stuff. But if you got any questions, throw them in the comment. Likes and shares are always appreciated. Subscribe to the channel. I got a lot of these videos. Going to be putting a seal kit and a door set on this machine right now. Probably make a video for those as well. If you're doing that, find those videos. That seal kit's kind of tedious. So thanks for watching.